What if I told you the Bible holds secrets about the origins of the black race that most people have never heard? What if ancient scriptures and historical records revealed a story far deeper than what we were taught? For centuries, people have sought to understand their roots. Some turn to science, others to history. But for millions, the Bible is the foundation of truth. Within its pages, we find a compelling narrative, one that traces the origins of humanity back to a single family, one that survived a world-altering flood, Noah and his 3 sons. Shem, Ham, and Japheth became the forefathers of nations, and among them Ham's lineage would shape much of what we now call Africa and the Middle East. But here's where things take a turn. For generations, misinterpretations of Scripture have led to false teachings, some even claiming that black people were cursed. This couldn't be further from the truth. In this video, we will uncover the real story of Ham's descendants, explore their significant impact on biblical history, and dismantle one of the most harmful misconceptions in theology, the so-called curse of Ham. This is not just a story of the past, it is a story of identity, heritage, and faith. From ancient Ethiopia to the powerful kingdom of Egypt, from mighty warriors to wise rulers, Ham's descendants were pioneers in civilization, trade, and governance. Their legacy is undeniable, yet their story remains largely misunderstood. By the end of this video, you'll see the Bible in a new light, and you might even discover connections to your own heritage. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear will challenge what many have been taught and reveal the profound truth hidden in Scripture. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more biblical insights. If you're passionate about uncovering lost history and biblical truth, this is the place for you. Now, let's journey back to the days after the Great Flood, where 3 brothers would lay the foundations of all civilizations, and where the story of the black race truly begins. After the flood, Noah became a man of the soil and planted a vineyard. Over time, his crops flourished, and he produced wine from the harvest. One day, after drinking too much, Noah became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. It was a moment of vulnerability, one that would set the stage for one of the most misunderstood events in biblical history. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness. The Bible doesn't give every detail, but something about Ham's actions deeply offended Noah. Some scholars suggest that Ham's offense was more than just accidentally seeing his father exposed. Perhaps it was an act of disrespect, mockery, or something more severe. Others argue that the phrasing, "saw his father's nakedness," could imply a greater wrongdoing, but the text itself leaves room for interpretation. What we do know is that Shem and Japheth responded very differently. Instead of looking at their father, they walked in backward and covered him, showing deep respect and honor. They refused to partake in Ham's actions, which suggests that what Ham did was inappropriate. When Noah awoke and learned what had happened, he pronounced a curse. But here's what many people misunderstand. The curse was not on Ham. Instead, Noah directed his words toward Canaan, one of Ham's sons. In Genesis 9:25-27, Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He then blessed Shem and Japheth, declaring that Canaan would serve them. But this raises an important question. Why did Noah curse Canaan and not Ham? If Ham committed the offense, why was his son the one to receive judgment? There are several possible explanations. Some scholars believe this was a prophetic declaration about the future Canaanite people, who would later become known for their idolatry, corruption, and immoral practices. The Canaanites occupied the land that God later promised to Israel, and their wicked ways led to their downfall. Another perspective is that this was a cultural reflection of how blessings and curses worked in ancient times. In biblical history, fathers often spoke words over their children that shaped their destinies for generations. By cursing Canaan, Noah may have been implying that Ham's dishonor would be reflected in his descendants. But here's what's crucial to understand. Noah's words were not a curse on all of Ham's descendants. This prophecy was specifically directed at Canaan, not Cush, not Mizraim, not Put, only Canaan. And yet, throughout history, people twisted this passage into something it was never meant to say. The idea that all of Ham's descendants including those in Africa, were cursed is a complete misreading of the text. This misinterpretation has caused untold harm, fueling justifications for slavery, racial discrimination, and colonial oppression for centuries. It became a tool of systemic racism, where people falsely claim that Ham's lineage was doomed to servitude. But when we go back to what the Bible actually says, we see that this idea is not supported by Scripture. In fact, many of Ham's descendants became rulers, warriors, and empire builders. They founded great cities, commanded armies, and built cultures that thrived for centuries. Think about this. If Ham's descendants were truly cursed, how do we explain the rise of Egypt, the most powerful civilization of the ancient world? How do we explain the mighty kingdom of Cush, known for its military strength and wealth? How do we explain the influence of the Phoenicians, who dominated Mediterranean trade? The truth is, Ham's descendants were not cursed. They were blessed with intelligence, strength, and innovation. So if Ham's African descendants were never cursed, then what happened to them? How did they rise to power and influence? And what role did they play in biblical history? To answer this, we need to follow the lineage of Ham's other sons, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, who built some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Their story is one of power, innovation, and divine destiny, a far cry from the false narrative that history has tried to paint. With the curse of Canaan clarified, it's time to shift our focus to Ham's other sons, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, who built some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Their story is not one of servitude or oppression, but of power, innovation, and divine destiny. Cush, the firstborn son of Ham, is one of the most fascinating figures in biblical history. His descendants settled in what we now call Ethiopia, Sudan, and parts of East Africa. The Bible often refers to Cush as a powerful nation, and history confirms that the Kushite Empire was one of Africa's greatest civilizations. The kingdom of Cush, located just south of Egypt, was famous for its mighty warriors, wealth, and architectural marvels. The Kushites built pyramids that still stand today, rivaling those of Egypt. They were skilled in ironworking, trade, and governance. In fact, at one point in history, Kushite kings ruled over Egypt itself, forming the 25th dynasty, also known as the Black Pharaohs of Egypt. The Bible also acknowledges the influence of Cush. In Isaiah 18, God speaks of Cush's strength and significance among nations. In the New Testament, we see an Ethiopian official, often called the Ethiopian eunuch, traveling to Jerusalem to worship. He encounters Philip the evangelist, who shares the gospel with him, and he becomes one of the first African converts to Christianity. The name Mizraim in the Bible is the Hebrew word for Egypt. This tells us that Ham's second son was the forefather of the Egyptian people, a civilization that became one of the most powerful in world history. Ancient Egypt was known for its advanced engineering, medicine, mathematics, and governance. The Great Pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx, and the vast temple complexes were all constructed by Mizraim's descendants. Their hieroglyphic writing system is one of the earliest forms of recorded language. Egypt also played a central role in biblical history. It was in Egypt that Joseph rose to power, saving his family from famine. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, performing miracles along the way. Even Jesus and his family sought refuge in Egypt to escape King Herod's wrath. But here's what's remarkable. If Ham's descendants were truly cursed, then why did God use Egypt as a place of provision, power, and refuge throughout the Bible? Clearly, Mizraim's lineage was blessed, not cursed. The third son of Ham, Put, is often overlooked in history, but his influence was significant. His descendants settled in North Africa, particularly Libya and surrounding regions. The people of Put were known as fierce warriors and skilled maritime traders. The Bible mentions them as allies in battle, often fighting alongside Egypt and Cush. In Ezekiel 30-5, God speaks of the mighty armies of Put, showing that they were a force to be reckoned with. Some historians believe that Put's descendants may have also contributed to the early Berber tribes of North Africa. These groups were known for their ability to navigate vast deserts, control trade routes, and resist foreign invasions. Cush, Mizraim, and Put each played an extraordinary role in shaping history. From the great cities of Egypt and Nubia to the warrior tribes of North Africa, their descendants influenced trade, science, politics, and even biblical prophecy. Their story isn't one of slavery or punishment. It's one of resilience, innovation, and God's divine plan for nations. So why were these truths hidden? Why did history distort the legacy of Ham's descendants? The answer lies in how historical narratives were rewritten and how theology was used to manipulate people's understanding of race and identity. For centuries, Africa played a central role in biblical history, yet much of its influence has been deliberately erased or overlooked. From powerful rulers to faithful servants of God, the Bible is filled with examples of African figures shaping the course of history. Many people assume that Christianity came to Africa through European missionaries, but that is far from the truth. In reality, Africa was one of the first places where Christianity took root, long before it spread to Europe. One of the most well-known biblical accounts of this is the story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8. This high-ranking Ethiopian official was on his way home from Jerusalem when he encountered Philip the evangelist, who explained the gospel to him. After believing in Jesus, the Ethiopian asked, "What can stand in the way of me being baptized?" He was baptized immediately, and he carried the message of Christ back to Ethiopia. This moment is profound because it means that Christianity was in Africa during the time of the apostles, long before it reached places like England, Germany, or Scandinavia. The Ethiopian Church, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, traces its roots back to this very encounter. Africa was not just a place where Christianity spread, it was home to powerful leaders and faithful followers of God. Let's look at a few examples. Zipporah, Moses' wife, Numbers 12-1. The Bible tells us that Moses married a Cushite woman named Zipporah, making her an African woman. She played a significant role in his life, and when Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses for marrying her, God defended their marriage. Pharaoh's daughter, Exodus 2. It was an Egyptian princess, a woman of African descent, who rescued baby Moses from the Nile and raised him as her own. Without her intervention, the entire story of Israel's exodus from Egypt would have been different. Simon of Cyrene, Luke 23:26. On his way to the cross, Jesus was too weak to carry his own cross. The Romans pulled a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, a North African, and forced him to help Jesus. This African man carried the cross of Christ, playing a direct role in the most important moment in human history. Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, Jeremiah 38:7-13. When the prophet Jeremiah was thrown into a cistern and left to die, an Ethiopian official named Ebed-Melech boldly spoke to the king and helped rescue him. His faithfulness was so significant that God later declared that he would be saved from destruction. If Africa played such an important role in the Bible, why has this truth been ignored or erased? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary to confront. As history unfolded, European powers reframed the narrative of Christianity, portraying it as a European religion. During the colonial era and transatlantic slave trade, certain biblical stories were misinterpreted to justify the oppression of African people. The contributions of African Christians, biblical figures, and early church fathers were systematically erased from mainstream teachings. But history tells a different story. Some of the greatest theologians of the early church were African. Tertullian, one of the first Christian theologians and writers, often called the father of Latin Christianity. Origen of Alexandria, a biblical scholar from Egypt who helped shape early Christian doctrine. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential Christian thinkers in history, a North African bishop whose writings shaped much of Western Christianity. These African leaders paved the way for the faith we practice today, yet their heritage is often downplayed or forgotten. The Bible is clear: all people are created in the image of God, Genesis 1:27. The idea that one race is superior or cursed has no foundation in Scripture. Ham's descendants were not cursed. They were leaders, warriors, scholars, and faithful servants of God. As believers, we must reclaim the full biblical narrative and recognize the contributions of Africa to God's divine plan. So, what does this mean for us today? It means recognizing the truth, celebrating the rich history of biblical Africa, and ensuring that future generations know their spiritual heritage. Africa's role in the Bible is not a side story. It's an essential part of God's plan for humanity. Understanding the true biblical history of Africa isn't just about correcting past misconceptions. It's about reclaiming a powerful spiritual heritage. For far too long, the descendants of Ham have been misrepresented, and their contributions to God's plan have been minimized. But when we look at the actual biblical and historical evidence, a different picture emerges. The truth is this: Africa was not cursed. Africa was chosen. Cush's descendants built some of the most advanced civilizations in the ancient world. Mizraim's people created an empire that shaped history, from medicine to architecture. Put's warriors defended territories and shaped trade routes. Canaan's lands were at the center of biblical prophecy and history. Instead of being a forgotten footnote in history, the descendants of Ham played a key role in shaping the biblical world, and their story didn't end in ancient times. It continues today. One of the most powerful themes in Scripture is God's love for all nations. In the New Testament, we see a vision of every tribe, tongue, and people worshiping before God's throne, Revelation 7-9. The message of the gospel was never meant for just one race or one group. It was meant for the entire world. This means that as believers today, we must reject false narratives that have been used to divide people, embrace biblical truth that affirms the value of all nations, celebrate the rich diversity that God created. We must remember that Christianity is not a European religion. It is a global faith, with deep roots in Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. The first Christian churches in Ethiopia, Egypt, and North Africa existed long before Christianity reached Western Europe. The importance of teaching the next generation. If we do not pass down biblical truth, then false teachings and distorted history will continue to shape people's views. That's why it's so important to teach the next generation that Africa's role in the Bible is undeniable, that Christianity was in Africa from the very beginning, that every nation has value and purpose in God's plan. If this message has opened your eyes to new biblical truths, don't let it stop here. Share it, teach it, live it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. What surprised you most about today's message? Like and share this video so that more people can uncover these hidden truths. Subscribe for more deep biblical teachings that reveal history, faith, and truth. The story of the black race in the Bible is not one of curses or shame. It is a story of strength, resilience, and divine purpose. Thank you for watching, and remember, truth sets us free. John 8:32.